On the morning of his execution, this Navy SEAL did not ask for mercy. He did not ask for forgiveness. He asked to see his dog. Everyone thought it was just a goodbye. Until the German Shepherd walked into the cell and refused to greet him. Instead, the dog began to circle him, sniff his back, and bark with urgency. What the court called guilt, the dog recognized as pain. What the system ignored, loyalty remembered. Sometimes God does not send angels. Sometimes He sends a faithful companion who never forgets the truth. And what happened next changed everything. An overcast autumn morning hung over the coastal military detention facility outside Bremerton, Washington, where damp air from the Pacific drifted inland and fallen leaves collected in the corners of concrete walkways under a muted gray sky. Elliot Vaughn Hale sat alone inside a reinforced holding cell, waiting for the final day of his life. He was 42 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with a frame built through years of disciplined service rather than brute size. His dark brown hair was cut short in strict military fashion, now lightly threaded with gray at the temples. His face bore the quiet wear of long deployments, sun-etched skin, a firm jaw, and eyes the color of cold steel, steady and unreadable. Those eyes had once scanned rooftops, alleyways, and distant ridgelines for threats. Now they rested on the blank wall across from him, calm, focused, unafraid. Elliot wore a plain gray detainee uniform. It hung slightly loose on his body, confinement having reduced some of the muscle that years of active duty had built, yet his posture remained unmistakably military. He sat upright on the narrow metal bench bolted to the floor, spine straight, shoulders squared, hands resting evenly on his thighs. Even in captivity, even with death scheduled within hours, he carried himself with discipline. It was not defiance. It was habit. Years earlier, when he had still been on active duty, wearing his issued U.S. Army OCP camouflage uniform, Elliot had been known among his peers as reserved and principled. He was not charismatic in the traditional sense, nor loud or theatrical. He spoke little, listened carefully, and expected precision, from himself first, then from others. Events early in his career had shaped that restraint. Loss had taught him silence. Responsibility had taught him control. By the time his service ended, he had learned to endure judgment without explanation and consequence without protest. The holding cell was quiet, broken only by the low hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of wind moving through trees beyond the outer walls. Somewhere farther away, gulls cried over the harbor, their voices thin and hollow. Autumn had settled fully into the region, bringing with it cooler air and a sense of finality that felt honest rather than cruel. Footsteps echoed down the corridor outside the cell. Elliot did not turn his head. He already knew the rhythm. Warden Daniel Price stopped in front of the bars. Price was a man in his mid-50s with thinning sandy hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. His uniform was crisp, his boots polished, his posture formal. He had overseen the facility for many years and had witnessed every possible reaction to impending execution: rage, despair, denial, bargaining. Elliot Hale displayed none of them. That, more than anything, unsettled him. "Hale?" Price said quietly. Elliot lifted his gaze. "Sir?" "The chaplain will be available shortly," Price continued. "Standard procedure. You're also entitled to one final request." The words hung in the air. For many men, this moment fractured them. For Elliot, it did not. He did not hesitate, nor did he weigh his options. His voice, when he spoke, was steady. "I want to see Briggs." Price frowned slightly. "Your former K-9?" "Yes." Briggs was a German Shepherd, 7 years old, bred and trained for military service. Large, powerfully built, with a dense black and tan coat and an alert, intelligent gaze, Briggs had served as Elliot's canine partner during his final years on active duty. Among handlers, Briggs had been known for his composure under pressure and his unwavering focus. He did not panic. He did not hesitate. He trusted his handler absolutely. To Elliot, Briggs had been more than a working dog. He had been a constant presence through night operations and long deployments, a silent partner who understood tone, posture, and intent without words. Where others spoke to fill silence, Briggs shared it. Where others questioned, Briggs followed. Price studied Elliot's face, searching for emotion that might explain the request. Nostalgia, fear, regret. He found only calm certainty. "You could request family," Price said carefully. "Legal counsel, spiritual guidance?" Elliot shook his head once. "Briggs." Price exhaled slowly. He made a note on his clipboard. "He's retired, assigned to another handler now. Transport may take time." "I understand," Elliot said. "I'll wait." There was nothing more to discuss. Price nodded once and turned away, his footsteps retreating down the corridor. Elliot returned his gaze to the wall. He did not think of the execution chamber. He did not rehearse final words. He thought instead of a familiar presence, of measured breathing beside him in the dark, of a shared understanding that had never required explanation. Outside, autumn wind stirred fallen leaves along the concrete. Inside the cell, Elliot Von Hale waited for the only farewell that mattered. The memory came to Elliot Von Hale not as a single image, but as a sequence of sensations, each one precise and unbroken, like a mission replayed in perfect order. The smell of dust carried on dry air, the weight of his issued U.S. Army OCP camouflage uniform settling against his shoulders. The steady rhythm of breathing beside him that did not belong to another man. Briggs had been young then, just over 2 years old, already large for his breed, with a thick black and tan coat, and an alert posture that never fully relaxed. His ears had stood high even during rest, angled toward sound, movement, and intent. From the moment Elliot first met him, Briggs had shown an unusual stillness. He did not pace. He did not whine. He watched. Trainers noticed it immediately. Some called it focus. Others called it stubbornness. Elliot recognized it for what it was: judgment. Elliot himself had been 36 at the time, already seasoned by years of service. He was not assigned Briggs by chance. The pairing came after a long evaluation process, one that considered not only operational skill, but temperament. Elliot was known for his quiet command style. He did not shout orders unless chaos demanded it. He expected precision, and he returned it. That made him an ideal match for a dog like Briggs, who responded better to intent than volume. Their first operation together had been a night reconnaissance mission in hostile terrain. The objective was simple: confirm movement patterns, identify supply routes, leave no trace. Elliot remembered crouching behind a collapsed wall, his uniform blending into the terrain, while Briggs lay pressed against the ground beside him, muscles taut but controlled. A patrol had passed within meters of their position. Elliot had felt the tension in the dog's body, coiled and ready. One command would have sent Briggs forward like a force of nature. Instead, Elliot had rested 2 fingers lightly against the dog's shoulder. Stay. Briggs had not moved. From that night on, trust was no longer theoretical. They deployed together across environments that tested both endurance and restraint. Arid compounds where heat distorted distance and sound carried unpredictably. Mountain passes where air thinned and every step demanded calculation. Urban zones where danger hid behind doors and inside voices. In each setting, Elliot learned how Briggs perceived the world. Briggs, in turn, learned Elliot's rhythms. He could sense when Elliot was calm and when he was calculating risk. He knew the difference between caution and hesitation. Other team members noticed it as well. One of them was Senior Chief Mark Donnelly, a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped dark hair and a scar running along his left jaw, a souvenir from an earlier deployment. Donnelly was blunt, impatient with inefficiency, but fiercely protective of his unit. He respected Elliot not for charisma, but for reliability. Watching Elliot and Briggs work together unsettled him at first. There was too little communication, too much silence. Over time, he came to understand that silence was the point. "They don't need words," Donnelly once said after a successful operation. "They just move." Another was Lieutenant Sarah Whitman, the team's intelligence liaison. She was tall, lean, with light brown hair pulled back tightly under her helmet, and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Whitman had grown cautious after a compromised operation years earlier had cost her a source, and nearly her life. Since then, she trusted patterns more than people. Watching Elliot and Briggs, she trusted them immediately. There were no contradictions between what they did and what they were supposed to do. The missions blurred together in memory, not because they lacked meaning, but because consistency defined them. Briggs detected hidden caches before explosives were triggered. He tracked movement across terrain that appeared empty to human eyes. He positioned himself instinctively between Elliot and unseen threats, not because he was commanded to, but because he understood priority. At night, when operations paused and men rested in controlled silence, Briggs stayed near Elliot. Not on command, not for reward, simply near. Elliot never questioned it. He had learned long ago that bonds formed under pressure did not require explanation. One operation stood out more than the others. It was a compound clearance at dawn, intelligence thin, and time limited. Elliot remembered the tension in the air, the way Briggs had slowed suddenly near a doorway, posture shifting from movement to assessment. Elliot had halted immediately, signaling the team to pause. Seconds later, a concealed threat revealed itself. The outcome could have been catastrophic. It was not. Afterward, no one spoke of it. Success required no ceremony. Through all of it, Elliot maintained distance with people and closeness with the dog. It was not that he disliked his teammates. He respected them deeply. But human relationships carried unpredictability. Words could be misinterpreted, motives could shift. Briggs was constant. He reacted only to what was real. That constancy mattered more than Elliot realized at the time. During a rare lull between deployments, Elliot had been tasked with evaluating new handlers. Watching them interact with dogs reminded him how unusual his partnership with Briggs was. Many handlers relied on dominance or excessive command. Briggs responded to neither. With Elliot, commands were minimal, expectations were clear. Trust filled the rest. One evening, after a training exercise that pushed the unit past exhaustion, Elliot sat outside the temporary barracks, boots planted in the dirt, uniform dusty and worn. Briggs lay beside him, head resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. The sky had been clear, stars sharp against the dark. For a long time, neither moved. Donnelly passed by, slowed, then stopped. "You ever think about what happens after this?" he asked, gesturing vaguely toward the horizon. Elliot did not answer immediately. "I think about finishing the job," he said finally. Donnelly nodded and walked on. Elliot reached down, resting his hand briefly against Briggs's neck. The dog did not look up. He did not need to. The bond between them was not built on affection alone. It was built on repetition, reliability, and shared survival. Each mission reinforced it. Each quiet success strengthened it. Over time, it became something the rest of the team accepted without comment. They were brothers in silence. The operation began without a name, without an official timestamp, and without a paper trail that could be followed later. That alone should have warned Elliot Von Hale that the mission existed in a space where accountability dissolved easily. It took place in a remote stretch of the Middle East, far from populated areas, where sand swallowed sound and the night erased distance. The air was dry and still, heavy with heat that lingered long after sunset, pressing against skin and equipment alike. Elliot moved at the front of the unit, his issued U.S. Army OCP camouflage uniform coated in dust, blending into the muted tones of the terrain. Briggs stayed close at his side, body low, movements controlled, ears angled forward. The dog was 6 years old then, fully mature, operating at the peak of his capability. His breathing was steady, measured, as if he already understood that this mission required restraint more than speed. Mason Kincaid followed several steps behind. Mason was 34, lean but strong, with short reddish-brown hair and a habit of scanning his surroundings more than necessary. He had a quick smile that surfaced in inappropriate moments and a restless energy that sometimes made others uneasy. Mason was competent, respected, and recently unsettled. In the weeks leading up to the operation, Elliot had noticed changes in him. Questions asked too often, pauses that lingered too long. It was not enough to accuse, it was enough to remember. The objective was vague by design. Secure a weapons storage site identified through fragmented intelligence. Confirm contents. Extract quietly. No engagement unless unavoidable. No external support. The silence surrounding the mission was deliberate. As the unit approached the structure, Briggs slowed abruptly. His posture shifted from movement to assessment. Elliot raised a fist, signaling a halt. The team froze. Briggs inhaled deeply, nostrils flaring, processing layers of scent carried on the still air. There was tension, but no alarm. Whatever was present, it was not immediate. They entered the compound in staggered formation. The interior was dim, lit only by filtered moonlight seeping through cracks in the roof. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by their movement. The building smelled of oil, metal, and old earth. Elliot felt the familiar narrowing of focus that came with high-risk environments. Every sound mattered. Every shadow carried weight. Mason moved ahead to check a side corridor. Elliot watched him go, tracking his silhouette until it disappeared around a corner. Briggs remained beside Elliot, muscles taut. Seconds stretched longer than they should have. Then came the gunshot. The sound was sharp, enclosed, violent in its finality. Elliot turned instinctively, weapon already rising. Briggs reacted instantly, surging forward with a force that pulled against Elliot's grip. They reached the corridor together. Mason lay on the ground, eyes open, expression frozen somewhere between surprise and recognition. Blood pooled beneath his chest, dark against the dirt floor. There were no other figures, no retreating footsteps, no movement beyond the dog's low, urgent growl. Elliot knelt, scanning the space, weapon tracking every angle. Training took over. Assess, secure, identify threat. There was none visible. The silence pressed in, absolute and wrong. Briggs began barking, loud, repeated. His voice echoed off the narrow walls, sharp and insistent. This was not a search alert. It was not a tracking signal. It was agitation, confusion layered with urgency. Elliot checked Mason for signs of life. There were none. The wound was fatal, precise, too precise. Footsteps thundered behind him as the rest of the unit converged. Questions erupted, commands overlapped. Elliot rose slowly, weapon still in his hand. The muzzle was warm. What followed happened quickly, and not quickly enough. Radio calls, orders to stand down, hands on Elliot's shoulders pulling him back. Briggs lunging, barking harder, body tense and unyielding as he was restrained. To those arriving at the scene, the picture was brutally simple. Mason Kincaid was dead. Elliot Von Hale was kneeling over him, weapon drawn. Briggs was barking uncontrollably at Elliot. No one asked why Briggs sounded different. No one paused to interpret behavior beyond the surface. There were no cameras in the structure, no external witnesses, no forensic evidence beyond what was immediately visible. The weapon matched the wound. The environment offered no alternative narrative. Elliot tried to speak. He said Mason had gone ahead. He said there had been no warning. He said Briggs had not alerted until after the shot. His words were noted and quietly dismissed. Briggs was removed first, led away by another handler as he strained against the leash, barking until his voice cracked. Elliot watched him disappear down the corridor, something tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with fear. The debrief was short, too short. The questions were narrow, too narrow. Mason's death was classified as internal engagement under unclear circumstances. Elliot was placed under armed guard before sunrise. By the time the sun rose, the mission no longer existed. Reports were sealed. Access was restricted. Names were removed from shared channels. The structure where Mason died was never mentioned again. The operation dissolved into silence, as if it had never taken place. Elliot replayed the moments endlessly in his mind. The timing, the position, the sound. He could not reconcile them. Something was missing, not evidence. Memory? There was a gap where understanding should have been. Briggs had known. Of that, Elliot was certain. The dog's reaction had not been accusation. It had been alarm. But in the absence of witnesses, interpretation hardened into conclusion. The military tribunal moved with efficiency. Evidence was presented without context. The image of Elliot at the scene was enough. The sound of Briggs' barking was framed as confirmation rather than question. Elliot did not shout. He did not plead. He stated his account once, then again, then stopped when it became clear that silence served the same purpose. The verdict arrived before doubt had time to form. Guilty. The mission vanished from record. Mason Kincaid was memorialized quietly. Elliot Von Hale was stripped of rank and name in equal measure. Only one thing remained unchanged. Briggs. Elliot Von Hale never remembered the night as a whole. There was no beginning, no middle, no clean end. Only fragments, sharp and incomplete, surfacing without warning and disappearing before he could hold them. Light came first. Artificial. Weak. Flickering against metal surfaces. It did not illuminate the space so much as distort it, stretching shadows where none should have been. Elliot remembered registering that detail even then. The light was wrong. Sound followed. Voices overlapping in short bursts. Controlled. Familiar. Not the chaos of a firefight, not the panic of ambush. It sounded like an argument restrained by discipline. That detail unsettled him more than the volume. Then pain. A sudden, precise impact between his shoulder blades. Not blunt force, not accidental. Sharp enough to steal his breath and collapse his balance. Elliot remembered the sensation clearly, the instant understanding that the threat was not where it was supposed to be. After that, nothing. No memory of falling, no image of the ground, no sense of time passing, just darkness. That absence became the center of everything that followed. During interrogations, Elliot was asked to explain what happened after the gunshot. He could not. He described the fragments. He described the gap. The gap was treated as avoidance. The fracture was treated as choice. Medical reviews acknowledged disorientation and trauma, but moved no further. There was no incentive to look deeper. The narrative had already formed. Years later, the fragments still returned. The flicker of light, the tone of voices, the pain in his back. Sometimes the sensations arrived together, sometimes alone, never enough to form a sequence. Elliot learned to live around the missing pieces, to stop forcing memory into a shape it refused to take. Briggs did not forget. For Briggs, the night existed not as images, but as scent and reaction. He remembered the compound as a map written in the air. Oil, dust, old metal, familiar human presence layered with something tense and unfamiliar. A deviation in pattern that had made him slow before the gunshot. After the sound, everything sharpened. Blood. Pain. Elliot's scent changing instantly, spiking with shock and injury. Briggs remembered pulling forward, barking not in aggression but in warning. Something was wrong, something unseen. Hands had dragged him back. Voices had commanded restraint. He remembered struggling against them, his focus locked not on Elliot as a threat, but on the space around him, the place where danger had originated and vanished. That distinction was never understood. To the soldiers arriving at the scene, Briggs's barking was interpreted as accusation. No one asked why it had started when it did. No one considered what it was directed toward. Briggs was removed from the site while Elliot was restrained. The separation registered as threat. The scent of confusion followed Briggs long after they left the compound. In the days that followed, Briggs searched for Elliot whenever he could. His behavior changed subtly. He became quieter, more watchful. He responded to commands with precision but without warmth. Handlers noted the shift and dismissed it as stress. They did not recognize memory. As proceedings advanced, Briggs's reaction at the scene was reduced to a single image, stripped of context and repeated until it became proof. Dogs did not testify. Instinct was not evidence. Elliot's fractured memory became confirmation of guilt rather than indication of injury. Silence hardened into conclusion. Over time, Elliot began to sense that what he had lost was not everything. The gap felt shaped, not empty. Something had been removed or locked away. The pain in his back lingered as a reminder that the fracture was physical as much as mental. Briggs carried the rest. Where Elliot remembered absence, Briggs remembered presence. Where Elliot felt confusion, Briggs retained certainty. The memory of betrayal stayed sharp, preserved in scent and reaction, waiting. Between them, the truth remained intact, but divided. One held the fragments, the other held the whole. The holding room was colder than Elliot Von Hale expected, not from temperature, but from restraint. Steel walls, bolted table, a single bench fixed to the floor. The kind of room designed to contain outcomes rather than people. Elliot stood at its center, wrists cuffed in front of him, posture unchanged. Years of discipline kept his shoulders square, his breathing steady. He did not look at the door. He did not need to. He could hear the sounds outside. Boots. A pause. The scrape of metal. When the door opened, the first thing that entered the room was not Briggs, but silence. Lieutenant Aaron Cole stepped in, holding a reinforced leash. Cole was 38, lean, his blond hair trimmed short, his expression guarded. He was careful in the way of someone walking into history that did not belong to him. Behind him came Briggs. Briggs stopped just inside the doorway. He was older than Elliot remembered. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. Gray threaded through the fur around his muzzle. His movements were slower by a fraction, controlled rather than restrained. But his presence still filled the room. Large frame, dense black and tan coat, ears upright, eyes sharp and assessing. For a brief moment, no one moved. Elliot did not speak. He did not kneel. He did not reach out. He knew better. This was not a reunion meant for comfort. Briggs did not pull forward. He did not whine. He did not show recognition in any way the officers expected. Instead, his body shifted, weight distributing evenly as his head lowered slightly. He inhaled, slow and deliberate. Cole tightened his grip. "Easy," he said quietly, though the command was unnecessary. Briggs took one step forward, then another, not toward Elliot directly, but to the side, beginning a wide circle. His pace was unhurried, intentional, each step placed with care. His nose hovered inches above the floor, then lifted briefly toward Elliot's chest, then lowered again. The guards lining the wall exchanged glances. One of them was Sergeant Lucas Farron, mid-40s, thick-necked, with a habit of leaning back on his heels when uncomfortable. Farron had worked detention security for years and prided himself on reading people quickly. Animals unsettled him. Briggs unsettled him immediately. "This isn't how dogs act," Farron muttered under his breath. Another guard, Corporal Nina Alvarez, younger and quieter, watched without comment. She was in her late 20s, dark hair pulled tight under her cap, eyes attentive. She had grown up around working dogs and recognized posture before she understood implication. Briggs continued circling. He passed behind Elliot, close enough that Elliot could feel the faint movement of air as the dog breathed. The familiar scent reached him then, muted but unmistakable. For the first time since his arrest, Elliot felt something shift inside his chest. Not relief, not hope. Recognition. Briggs stopped. His nose hovered near Elliot's lower back. He inhaled again, deeper this time. His posture stiffened. Muscles along his shoulders tightened visibly beneath his coat. The room went still. Cole frowned. He knew this stance. He had seen it during training exercises and field evaluations. It was not aggression. It was assessment. "What's he doing?" Farron asked. Cole did not answer immediately. His eyes stayed on Briggs. "He's working." "That's not what this is," Farron said. "This is a visit." Briggs moved again, completing the circle. He lifted his head, eyes never leaving Elliot, then lowered it once more, drawing in scent with controlled intensity. His tail remained still. His ears stayed forward. Elliot closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. He did not move. He trusted the process. Briggs released a low sound from his chest. Not a growl, not a warning, something between. Cole's grip tightened. "Briggs," he said, firmer now. The dog did not respond. Briggs stepped back, repositioned himself directly in front of Elliot, and barked once, sharp, focused, purposeful. Every guard stiffened. "That's enough," Farron said, shifting his stance. "Control your dog." Cole raised a hand. "He's not out of control." Briggs barked again, then again, each bark measured, consistent, directed not at Elliot's face, but at his body, his presence, his position in the room. Cole felt a prickle along his spine. He had heard that bark before. It was not excitement. It was not distress. It was the alert Briggs used in the field when something did not align with expectation. "What's he alerting on?" Alvarez asked quietly. Cole swallowed. "I don't know." Farron scoffed. "He's reacting to his former handler. That's all." But Cole was not convinced. Briggs was not acting confused. He was not acting emotional. He was acting precise. Briggs moved again, closing the distance until his nose hovered inches from Elliot's chest. He inhaled sharply, then shifted downward, tracing scent along Elliot's torso with methodical focus. His breathing changed, deeper now. Elliot felt the weight of memory press against him. Not images, not clarity, just certainty. Cole stepped closer. "He's checking him," he said, "like a scene." "That's impossible," Farron said. "There's nothing to check." Briggs barked again, louder this time. The sound echoed off the steel walls, abrupt and undeniable. It was the same bark Cole had heard during explosives training, the same one used when Briggs identified a threat or anomaly. Alvarez's expression changed. "That doesn't sound like recognition." "No," Cole said quietly. "It doesn't." Briggs backed away one step, then sat. His eyes remained locked on Elliot. His body remained tense. For the first time since the door opened, doubt crept into the room. Farron cleared his throat. "This visit is over." "Wait," Cole said. "Something's off." Farron turned sharply. "The man is scheduled for execution. This is not a training exercise." Cole met his gaze. This dog doesn't mistake emotion for instruction. Briggs rose again, pacing once more. Slower now. His behavior had changed the room. What had been routine had become uncertain. Elliot remained silent. He did not need to speak. The question was no longer his. Briggs stopped in front of him one last time, ears forward, eyes intent, as if committing something to memory already stored. Then he barked once more. The sound did not accuse. It demanded attention, and for the first time since the mission that vanished, someone listened. The room did not return to normal after Briggs barked. Silence remained, tense and unfinished, as if something had been interrupted rather than concluded. Elliot Vaughn Hale stood exactly where he was, wrists cuffed, breathing even. He had learned long ago that movement invited interpretation. He would not offer one. Briggs did not sit. He did not relax. He repositioned. The dog moved behind Elliot again, slower this time, head lowered, nose working with deliberate focus. His posture was unmistakable. This was not recognition. This was not emotion. It was task behavior. Lieutenant Aaron Cole felt it immediately. His grip on the leash tightened, not to restrain Briggs, but to steady himself. He had seen this pattern in field conditions, in makeshift aid stations and collapsed structures. Briggs used it when searching for injured personnel, when locating trauma hidden beneath clothing and gear. Farron shifted uneasily. "What's he doing now?" Cole did not answer right away. His attention was fixed on Briggs's movement, the way the dog slowed at Elliot's lower back, the way his breathing deepened, sharp and controlled. Briggs stopped. His nose hovered inches from Elliot's spine. He inhaled once, twice. His body stiffened. A low sound vibrated in his chest, not a growl, not a warning, but confirmation. Then he barked. The sound was different from before. Shorter, more insistent, repeated. Cole felt a chill crawl up his arms. "That's a medical alert," he said. Farron scoffed. "You're reaching." Briggs barked again, louder now, and pressed his nose briefly against Elliot's back, right where the uniform creased near the shoulder blades. Elliot closed his eyes. The sensation triggered something immediate and physical. His muscles tightened. A dull ache flared beneath his skin, familiar and distant at the same time. Alvarez stepped closer. "What kind of medical alert?" Cole swallowed. "Trauma," he said, "specifically penetrating injuries." Farron stared at him. "You're saying the dog thinks he's injured?" "I'm saying the dog is trained to detect it," Cole replied. "And he doesn't false alert." Briggs barked again, then sat abruptly, eyes locked on Cole as if awaiting acknowledgement. Cole hesitated only a moment. Then he looked to Farron. "We need to check his back." Farron's jaw tightened. "This is a detention facility. He's a condemned prisoner." "And he's a former operator," Cole said. "If there's an injury, it matters." Farron hesitated. The room felt smaller now, heavier. Finally, he nodded once. "Quickly." Cole stepped closer to Elliot. "Sir," he said quietly, "I need to check your back." Elliot did not respond at first, then he nodded once. "Do it." Cole reached for the back of Elliot's detainee uniform, hesitating briefly before lifting the fabric. The overhead light caught pale, uneven skin beneath. There it was, a scar, old but unmistakable. Narrow, deep, angled slightly downward. Not the result of shrapnel or blunt trauma. Not surgical. The edges told their own story. This had been a blade, driven with intent. The room went silent. Alvarez sucked in a quiet breath. Farron swore under his breath. Cole stared, pulse hammering. "That's not superficial," he said. "That's a stab wound." Elliot's breath caught. His mind reeled. The image of pain surged forward, sharper now, more defined. The pressure, the collapse, the darkness. His hand clenched involuntarily. "I didn't know," he said, voice steady but strained. "I don't remember it." Cole nodded slowly. "You wouldn't," he said. "Shock can suppress memory, especially if it wasn't treated properly." Farron stepped closer, eyes narrowed. "How long ago?" Cole glanced at the scar. "Years. The tissues healed unevenly. That happened in the field." Briggs stood again, moving closer, nose hovering near the scar, as if to underline the point. He barked once, sharp and final. "That dog's been alerting on this the entire time," Alvarez said quietly. Farron looked away. "This doesn't prove anything." "It proves he was injured," Cole said. "And that injury didn't come from a firefight. It came from behind." The implication hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Elliot's thoughts raced. The voices, the light, the pain. Something shifted. The fragments began to align, not into a full picture, but into direction. "I was attacked," he said slowly, "before Mason was shot." No one contradicted him. Cole straightened. "If he was stabbed before the gunshot," he said, "then he wasn't in control of the scene when it happened." Farron's expression hardened. "You're making assumptions." "I'm following evidence," Cole replied. Briggs barked again, pacing once, then stopping behind Elliot, positioning himself between Elliot and the guards. The movement was subtle but deliberate, protective. Alvarez noticed it. "He's guarding him." Farron stared at the dog. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his posture. "Control your animal." Cole did not pull the leash. "He is under control." Elliot felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not hope, not relief. Recognition. The scar burned faintly now, as if awakened by attention. Briggs moved once more, sniffing the air around Elliot, then lifting his head sharply, ears forward. His focus shifted, not randomly, but with purpose, as if connecting memory to presence. Cole noticed. "He's not done," he said quietly. Farron shook his head. "This ends now." But the room had already changed. The scar spoke without words. It did not tell a story. It pointed. And for the first time since the mission that vanished, the truth was no longer silent. The room had not finished adjusting to the discovery of the scar when the presence at the doorway shifted the balance again. Footsteps approached with confidence, unhurried and authoritative, the kind that assumed compliance before it was given. Several guards straightened instinctively. Grant Holloway entered without announcing himself. He was a tall man in his early 50s, broad through the shoulders, posture rigid with practiced command. His hair was dark and carefully groomed, his face composed in a way that suggested years of control rather than comfort. Holloway wore a senior officer's uniform, immaculate and precise, every line pressed flat. He had the look of someone accustomed to being obeyed without explanation. "Why is this taking so long?" Holloway said, his voice even, eyes scanning the room. He did not look at Elliot Von Hale at first. He looked at Lieutenant Aaron Cole. "This visit has exceeded its purpose." Cole met his gaze. "Sir, we've identified an injury that warrants attention." Holloway's eyes shifted then, landing on Elliot with brief, assessing interest. "He's been examined," Holloway said. "The record is clear." Before Cole could respond, Briggs reacted. The change was immediate and unmistakable. The dog's body stiffened, ears snapping forward as his focus locked onto Holloway. A low growl rolled out of his chest, deep and sustained, vibrating through the room. It was not warning. It was recognition. Several guards reached for their weapons. "Control that dog!" Holloway snapped, stepping back half a pace before catching himself. Cole did not pull the leash. He watched Briggs, his expression tightening. "Briggs," he said, measured. The dog did not disengage. Briggs took one step forward, placing himself between Elliot and Holloway, his stance wide and deliberate. His eyes never left the officer. The growl deepened, edged with certainty. "That animal is out of line," Holloway said, voice sharp now. "Remove it from the room." Cole shook his head slowly. "Sir, he's reacting to you." Farron scoffed nervously. "Dogs react to authority all the time." "No," Cole said. "They react to threat." Holloway's jaw tightened. "This is unacceptable." Briggs barked once, loud, direct, accusatory. The sound cut through the room like a blade. Alvarez felt it then, the shift she could not explain. She had seen dogs bark before. She had never seen one accuse. Holloway's composure cracked for just a moment. His eyes flicked toward the door, then back to Briggs. "This is absurd," he said. "You're letting an animal disrupt a lawful process." Cole stepped closer. "Sir," he said quietly, "Briggs doesn't alert without cause. He's trained to identify hostile presence and concealed threat." Holloway laughed once, sharp and humorless. "I'm a commanding officer." Briggs growled louder, muscles tensing, teeth flashing briefly as he took another step forward. "Enough!" Farron barked. "Stand down." Briggs did not. Elliot spoke for the first time. "He knows," he said calmly. The words landed heavier than volume ever could. Holloway's gaze snapped to him. "You don't speak unless addressed?" Elliot held his eyes. "You were there." Silence slammed into the room. Holloway's lips pressed thin. "That's a dangerous accusation." Briggs barked twice, rapid and forceful. Cole felt it click into place. The memory of the compound, the absence of records, the precision of Mason's death, the scar on Elliot's back. "Sir," Cole said carefully, "were you present at the site the night Mason Kincaid was killed?" Holloway's response came too fast. "No." Briggs lunged forward, stopped only by the leash snapping taut. His bark exploded through the room, feral and certain. "That's a lie," Alvarez whispered. Holloway's face flushed. "Get that dog out of here." "No," Cole said. "Not yet." Farron hesitated, caught between rank and instinct. Cole pressed on. "That mission didn't exist on paper," he said. "No cameras, no witnesses, a convenient gap. Someone authorized that." Holloway took a step back. "You're out of line." Briggs shifted again, angling his body, nose lifting slightly as if tracking something in the air that no one else could perceive. His growl dropped into a low, steady rumble that spoke of memory rather than emotion. Cole's voice hardened. "He's recognizing you from that night?" Holloway shook his head. "This is insanity." Elliot's eyes never left him. "You stabbed me," he said, "before Mason was shot." Holloway's breathing changed, subtle, uneven. Briggs barked again, then stopped, standing perfectly still, eyes fixed, posture locked. It was the stance of final identification. Farron stepped forward. "Sir, maybe we should pause this." Holloway's hand moved, not fast enough. He reached toward the inside of his jacket, a reflex more than a plan. Guards surged forward instantly, weapons raised, shouts overlapping. Holloway froze, hand half lifted, realization dawning too late. Cole stared at him. "You just confirmed it." The room erupted into controlled chaos. Holloway was restrained, his protests sharp and frantic now, the mask finally gone. "You don't understand," he shouted. "It wasn't supposed to go that far." Elliot closed his eyes briefly. The fragments aligned, not gently, but with force. Under pressure, Holloway's story unraveled quickly. A weapons pipeline operating off the books. Mason had discovered it. Elliot had arrived unexpectedly. Panic had followed. A blade to incapacitate, a shot to silence. A scapegoat chosen for convenience. Briggs stood still throughout the confession, his focus unwavering, as if he had completed the task he had carried for years. When Holloway was finally let out, the room felt hollowed, stripped of tension it had carried for too long. Cole exhaled slowly. "He used you," he said to Elliot. Elliot nodded once. "He tried." Briggs stepped back then, returning to Elliot's side, body pressed close in quiet certainty. The enemy had never been distant. He had worn authority. He had stood among them. And he had been seen. Morning came quietly to the coastal base, filtered through low autumn fog that softened the outlines of buildings and muted the sound of the harbor beyond the perimeter. The air carried the scent of salt and wet leaves. It was not a dramatic sunrise. It did not need to be. Elliot Von Hale stood just inside the administrative wing, hands free for the first time in years. The cuffs were gone. The guards nearby no longer watched him with suspicion, but with a restrained, uncertain respect. Paperwork moved quickly now, signatures added with urgency rather than doubt. Orders were reversed, records amended. The language was formal, careful, but the meaning was clear. The sentence was vacated. Elliot listened as the words were read, his expression unchanged. He did not smile. He did not react outwardly at all. Relief arrived slowly, cautiously, as if unsure it was permitted. The weight that lifted from his chest was not sudden. It eased, inch by inch, making room for breath he had not realized he had been holding. Grant Holloway's name was removed from conversation as efficiently as it had once been protected. Investigators moved with purpose now, retracing steps that had been deliberately erased. The mission that had vanished returned to record under scrutiny it had never received. Mason Kincaid's death was reclassified. Responsibility shifted where it belonged. Elliot did not involve himself. He answered questions when asked. He did not expand. He did not defend. He had learned that truth did not require embellishment. It only required space. When the final authorization came through, a junior officer approached him. The man was nervous, early 30s, his uniform crisp and new. "Sir," he said, unsure whether the title was allowed again. Elliot met his eyes. "Yes?" "You're cleared to depart the facility." Elliot nodded once. Outside, the fog thinned as the morning progressed, revealing patches of pale sky. The gate stood open. No escort waited. No instructions followed him. For the first time in years, the path forward belonged to him. Briggs waited near the exit. The dog stood calmly, leash loose in Lieutenant Aaron Cole's hand. His posture was relaxed now, ears neutral, tail low. The tension that had driven him for years had finally released. When he saw Elliot, his response was understated but unmistakable. He stepped forward, closing the distance without hesitation, pressing his shoulder lightly against Elliot's leg. Elliot stopped. He looked down at Briggs, really looked at him, taking in the gray along his muzzle, the familiar intelligence in his eyes. He knelt slowly, one knee touching the damp concrete, and rested his forehead briefly against the dog's head. The contact was steady, grounding. "Good job," Elliot said quietly. Briggs exhaled, a deep, satisfied breath, and leaned into him. Cole watched in silence. He did not interrupt. He understood that whatever passed between them did not require witness. As Elliot rose, Cole stepped forward. "He's cleared to go with you," he said. That was approved. Elliot absorbed the words. "Thank you." Cole nodded. He never stopped waiting. They walked together toward the gate. No formation, no command, just movement. Beyond the perimeter, the road curved toward the shoreline, disappearing into mist. The base behind them faded into the background, another structure swallowed by fog and memory. Elliot paused once more, turning back briefly. Not to the buildings, but to the flag near the entrance, hanging still in the quiet air. He stood straight, shoulders squared, acknowledging not the institution that had failed him, but the ideals that had not. Then he turned away. Briggs matched his pace instinctively, stepping in sync as if the years between them had never existed. Whatever distance time and confinement had imposed dissolved with each step forward. The truth had been heard, not because it was loud, but because it was consistent, not because it demanded attention, but because it endured. Loyalty had carried it. As they moved down the road, fog lifting gradually around them, Elliot felt something unfamiliar settle into place. Not victory, not closure. Home. Sometimes the miracle does not arrive as thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes it arrives quietly through loyalty that refuses to forget. Elliot survived not because the system was just, but because truth endured long enough to be heard. In the darkest moments, when memory failed and voices were silenced, something greater was still at work. Many would call it chance. Others would call it instinct. But faith teaches us that God often works through devotion, patience, and the hearts that remain faithful when everything else falls apart. In this story, the miracle was not the absence of suffering. It was the presence of purpose within it. God did not remove the trial immediately. Instead, He preserved the truth until the right moment. Through a loyal companion, through unseen memory, through time itself, justice was allowed to rise. This reminds us that even when we feel forgotten, we are never unseen. Even when the world turns away, God never does. In everyday life, we all carry moments when we feel misunderstood, judged, or buried under circumstances we did not choose. Like Elliot, we may not always have the strength to speak, but faith tells us that silence does not mean defeat. Trust does not mean weakness, and loyalty to truth will always matter, even when it seems to cost everything. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you to stay faithful when answers are delayed. Stay kind when the world is harsh. Stay true when it would be easier to surrender. And trust that God is still working, even when you cannot see the full picture yet. If you believe that loyalty, truth, and faith still matter in this world, please share this story with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment with the word Amen if you believe that God watches over the faithful. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories that honor courage, truth, and the quiet miracles that change lives. May God bless you, protect you, and guide you through every unseen battle. Amen.